All right, so what about UV radiation? Well, there's actually three different types. There's UVA, UVB, and UVC. And each one is a little bit different in how damaging it is. So, UVA is the lowest energy, and so it reaches Earth in the greatest quantity. And thankfully, it doesn't do a whole lot of damage. It can do some damage, but it doesn't do a whole lot of damage to our skin. Now, UVB, this is kind of medium there. A lot of it is absorbed by ozone in the atmosphere. Does start to damage skin though. It will damage the outermost layer of skin, and then it does a really good job breaking chemical bonds, and so it can start to cause a lot of damage. If you think about, what holds our body together, we have all sorts of things that are bonded together, and so we don't really want to mess with the bonds unless we're doing it on purpose, right? And so UVB can start to damage bonds inside of our body that we don't want to be damaged. And then UVC, terribly harmful. However, thankfully, our atmosphere absorbs all of it, so we don't have to worry about it damaging us as long as we still have our atmosphere. Okay, and so you can see here that UVC gets stopped before it comes down. UVB, a lot of it gets absorbed, and then UVA, that's the most reaches it. And so here you can kind of take a look there. So UVC 100% absorbed, UVB, most of it's absorbed, and then UVA, just a little bit is absorbed, but it is the least damaging. So we still have to be careful with that though. All right, now when we think about what's happening with the different radiation and the layers of our skin. So UVA, yes, it does penetrate deep into our skin. Thankfully though, it doesn't have the right energy to start to mess with the chemical bonds in our bodies. So while it is not something that we, want to have start messing with us because it can start to cause damage, thankfully, it is not the most damaging. And then we've got our UVB. It doesn't go down as far, but it is a lot more damaging. And so what happens? Well, so our UV radiation, there's, energy. And so what ends up happening is that we've got photons, right? So it's a little particle of energy that gets emitted. And so these photons, they can get in, they can disrupt chemical bonds, they start to vibrate around, and then the bond breaks. Okay. Now, when we talk about the different radiation levels, there's a lot of different things to consider. All right. So, how many clouds are in the sky? Where are you? Are you high up? Are you low down? Are you in an area where you have to worry about ground reflection? So snow actually reflects a lot of UV light. And so if you're in a snowy area and it'll reflect right back at you, that's why people that ski still need to wear sunscreen and still need to make sure that they're wearing something protective over their eyes. The amount of ozone that's around, that has to do with how much radiation you're exposed to. Where in Earth or where on the Earth you are, that also will affect it. So lots of different factors will affect how much UV radiation you are being exposed to when you are outside. Okay. So when we look at the elevation of the sun, the higher the sun is in the sky, the higher the UV radiation level. And so the UV radiation is going to vary throughout the day, and it will vary throughout the year as well. And so when we get sun at the maximum elevation, that's when you're going to get the most amount of UV exposure. And then when you look at where you are on Earth, okay, so the closer you are to the equator, the higher the UV radiation levels. Okay, cloud cover, all right, so cloud cover will definitely filter quite a bit of UV radiation, but sometimes it can reflect. And so you can end up getting it reflecting off, or sometimes it can scatter though. And so that can end up causing things to increase. And so clouds are not always a surefire way of avoiding UV radiation altogether. All right, and then altitude, how high up you are, because you are going into, higher and higher altitudes, you get closer up. So as you go higher up, then you get exposed to more UV radiation as well. You don't have as much atmosphere that it's being filtered through, and you get, closer up there. And then we have some natural protection there in that ozone layer. So our ozone levels do vary throughout the year. They vary across the day. And so you're going to see different levels of UV radiation depending on the time of year and depending on the time of day. And then you do get that ground reflection, especially where there's stuff like snow. Okay. And so you get reflection, you get scattering. So snow can reflect as much as 80% of UV radiation. Sand also does reflect a bunch of UV, and so does the ocean. And so you still have to be careful even with that reflection coming off. So there's this thing called the UV index, and it lets you figure out, all right, well, how bad is the UV radiation at any given time, and what sorts of precautions do you need to make? And so anytime you get a UV index of 3 or higher, you want to start protecting your skin, okay? And so different times of day give us different levels of protection, right? So here's what these numbers mean. So 0 to 2, average person, not going to have any danger. And so if you wear a hat and sunglasses, you're okay. It'll take an hour or more to burn. If you're like me though, so notice it says average person. So I burn really easily. I'm a redhead. I have very fair skin. So even in conditions where they say that you don't have to worry as much, I still have to be really careful. And people taking certain medications can also be extra UV sensitive. So even a UV 0, they still need to be wearing some sort of protection. And then 3 to 5, now you want to start using sunscreen. It will take less time to get burnt. 6 to 7, be more protected. It'll take even less time to get burned. And then as you go down. So that UV index can help you kind of get an idea of, well, just how bad is the UV at that moment. And so here's some data that I found from San Diego, so about 10 years ago now, so March 2014, and it's February 2024, so about 10 years ago. So you can see that the UV index changed throughout the day. So early in the morning, all right, very low. Then we get to mid-morning, and it gets to 9. So UV index of 2. Around 10, we were up to UV index of 3. And then by the time we got to our middle of the day, our UV index was up there at 7. All right, so just throughout the day, quite a variance in what sort of protection that you would need here in San Diego. So not a bad idea to check the UV index if you're going to be outside. But it's always good to protect yourself no matter what.